Are we ready for more Lord of the Rings? Apple manages to crush all of creativity and culture in one 60-second ad. Video games, are they the new Hollywood? All this and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture.
Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 10 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined, as I always am, by the planet to my ape, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, not too much, Daniel. So, Planet of the Apes. Another installment I have not seen.
You're no longer just a planet, but now they have a kingdom. Like these, we got to
They're
get
expanding.
these apes under control and back in the zoo.
You know, what's probably not under control is your addiction to British television and movies. I'm sure you've already dusted off your silver in great anticipation. Major paper chain for the third installment of Downton Abbey was released or has been noted as in production.
Oh,
Finally.
they are making another one.
They're making what? Play dumb. It's okay. But I know you.
I'm a movie only. I'm like one of those. So
Yeah.
But
Well, this is the third movie of their installment. You know, any guesses as to if, the Dowager Countess may
who
kick-
will end up
kick-
with who?
kick the
Romance
bucket
sparks.
this movie? Who knows?
Hey, I do have a deep appreciation for like bougie British laid back soap operas. So I may be checking out for the purposes of review.
I'm sure. Yes.
Only. And the second time was just to double check. But one other thing that is coming out that I have more of an investment in that I did want to just note, again, you'll be hearing more about this in the days, the episodes
much more
ahead. But just to let you guys know that I actually have a new book that I co-wrote with my brother called Straight to the Heart, Communicating the Gospel in an Emotionally Driven Culture. This is a new book. We're very proud of this book. I think it's a very important book. Of course, I say that. But this is...
As the author?
As the author.
You would think that, wouldn't you?
And hopefully, I have full confidence that you will also find just some interesting insights in there, and or at least things to think about whether you agree with us or don't. So that book will be coming out in August, but the pre-orders are already available. So we'll drop links to that in the comment section. Have you already pre-ordered my book?
It is on my list of things to do, actually. So I'm sure I will get to it hopefully before August.
We'll check in next episode. But speaking of other things that are coming up, kind of the first thing for us to just jump into for this episode is another thing that I am always very enthusiastic to dig into. If you know me, you know that we weren't going to pass up the opportunity to discuss some of this, and that is Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, the world he built, the mythology, the stories, and it's a good time to be a Tolkien nerd.
There's a lot happening in the Middle-earth.
So we were already planning to just geek out a little bit about the recently announced news that there are going to be, more movies set in Middle-earth with Peter Jackson returning. So that was already on the show notes. And then just today, they dropped, Amazon did, the trailer for season 2 of the controversial but high-budget spectacle Rings of Power season 2. You saw the teaser. We'll start with that, then we'll get to the movie.
It looks great. I'm excited about it. I know there's mixed emotions about season 1. It is slow, a lot of explanatory talky bits, but it's just to me it's just a really well done show. It's a lot of fun and just super interesting, and this sort of the Dark Lord is front and center in the season 2 trailer.
Yeah, this one definitely looks more intense. I kind of forgot. I know when this show was coming out, we talked about this. I forgot what your take was. I think you were sort of like it's good, it's not great, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, lots of, I think, great parts to it. Obviously, the visuals are stunning and super well done. But I think it is overall maybe a bit slow. But yeah, if I can recall.
Because I was probably more favorable to this than a lot of people were. I really enjoyed this. I watched this with my whole family, and we were super into it. Obviously, there are things that you can nitpick and some some things that don't work. But I did think overall that, and I feel like even as a Tolkien nerd, although a lot of Tolkien nerds really didn't like this show, a lot of the things that people criticize the show for is actually almost more Tolkien than the movies. Some of the more the more gravitas, toss like conversations and like the meatier themes, as opposed to like a bunch of action and stuff, which really isn't what the Lord of the Rings was like. The books and like
Right.
Tolkien, like Tolkien's son hated the movies when they came out because they're like they just took my dad's like great work of literature and made it into like a dumb Hollywood action movie. And then like this show kind of went a bit more to like the talking and the themes, and people are like, we need more dumb Hollywood action movie. I do think
Yeah.
maybe one of my concerns, again, if you don't like it, you don't like it. Like I don't. It's not like you have to like it. Some of the critiques and stuff, I feel like I don't know, and I do think I got swept up in some culture war stuff of like this was like woke Hollywood, and it was all these kind of conversations and
Yeah.
stuff where like a lot of opinions were already decided before this thing came out.
Yeah, I think that's true. No, I mean, I think it's, more Lord of the Rings, I think is probably a good thing. And so if the Rings of Power is more, you know, accurate to Tolkien's original uh, uh, writings, that's great. If, Lord of the Rings, the main trilogy is closer to like Hollywood adaptation, then that's, I mean,
Yeah, and it's sort of
I think it's a little bit for
and it's
everybody.
like the movies obviously followed like the book story that Tolkien wrote, where like the show, I feel like the spirit was almost more in line, but it's making up stories because we don't have
Yeah.
or at least they don't have the
And it's
rights to
it's
those
a
stories that like
my understanding is also like a great like condensing
yeah,
of
like they're playing around with
timelines
the
and
like. So in that way, it's not faithful because like
yeah.
you just can't show it. I will say one of my concerns with this teaser is just I hope they don't go too dark. Like I know I just again we've talked we could probably do a whole episode on like I'm just so over the like you know like dark is synonymous with better, and like almost every time there's a sequel it's like
Yeah.
this one's gonna be darker, and it's like well like why like does darker have to be like
Well, you have to have, you know, the second I'm blanking on the name now.
the Empire Strikes Back?
Empire Strikes
Yeah.
Back before you have Return of the Jedi. So,
Yeah,
in that
and I
sense.
feel like what makes like because Tolkien stories that like they are dark, like there is darkness to
Yeah.
them, but there's always like that points characters towards the light, and I do think I'm worried that they try and do because this show even from the start was like, compared to like, Game of Thrones, like it released the same week as House of the Dragon, which was the new Game of Thrones spinoff, and like I noticed even like they released the teaser for Rings of Power today, and then like an hour later the Rings or the House of the Dragon released
Yeah.
a new trailer. Like there is sort of that competition, and
Yeah.
I feel like what I liked about the Tolkien universe is that it wasn't like I feel like the Game of Thrones is more like things are dark, people are bad, and like, so to overcome that, like you just got to kind of become a bit bad yourself. Where like
Yeah.
Tolkien's always been like the world's bad, there's darkness, so like you need to look to the light and like the hopefulness and like keep
Yeah.
going. And so I hope they do maintain some of that, which the movies do. And like we don't need to spend a whole lot of time getting into the
Yeah.
movies too, but they did announce that they are making new movies. The first one that, or the only one that they've like, given details about, The Hunt for Gollum, directed by Gollum himself, or maybe we'll call him Smeagol if he's behaving himself. So Andy Serkis is going to be directing this movie, which I know, like, for those that aren't just waste all their time reading Tolkien mythology and stuff, like, it's not even set that far in the past. Like, this is like essentially when like Gandalf, like after Bilbo's party, like it's keep it secret, keep it safe, and runs off. Like the story takes place a lot in that period. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Which is way longer.
yeah, in the books it's like 17 years or something. Like
Yeah. And
in
in the
movie,
movies, it's like,
yeah.
I'm going to go away
Um,
for the summer and I'll be back in a month.
and I'll admit, like, I'm excited for Lord of the Rings stuff. Like, I'm always going to be excited. But I was kind of like, I don't know. I'm worried about. I just don't know if we need a Hunt for Gollum movie, and I don't, especially if we're like recasting. If we
A
have like
bunch
a
of,
new, younger, it's like Tom Holland as Aragon or something like.
yeah.
Because like all the same characters, like Gandalf would be in this. Like
Yeah.
Legolas could be in this. Like obviously Gollum will look the same, but like I don't know. I don't know if we need to fill in every little gap like that.
Well, and so because this also reminds me, and of course I'll try and bring Star Wars in here. Like I saw a preview for, I think it's called Acolyte,
Yeah, the
the
new.
new like Star Wars Jedi backstory stuff, where it very much gave me the vibe of like is the Sith really all that bad, and like the whole like I don't know, just I think sort of what you were talking about, like darker is better, and like trying to do a lot more like line blurring between like good and evil. And so I don't know, I just feel like with some of this stuff, and I think Star Wars has certainly fallen into this trap of just like, let's just fill in all the gaps of all the original stories, and like that can't be bad, right? And
Yeah, and like make you question
maybe
what you thought you knew this, but actually,
yeah.
Aragon, we're going to show the other side of Aragon. He
Well,
wasn't noble.
yeah, and you like insert sort of like contemporary ideas and ideology into, you know, original stories from like way back when, and then it sort of dilutes, I think, the potency of the original story some. So I don't know. Yeah,
And I do think there is, the last thing that we can move on from Lord of the Rings, begrudgingly we'll move on.
yeah. But do we have
But
to?
I feel like there is, at least for me, and I feel like I'm not the only one, like as a Christian, there is a trepidation of like, we don't necessarily trust Hollywood with a story that like Tolkien himself would say is like a fundamentally Catholic or Christian work. Like,
Yeah,
and like the original trilogy did capture a lot of that. Like they're,
yeah.
as Christians, we can enjoy, like it didn't maybe go as deep into the theological stuff as Tolkien would have, but like we can appreciate that. And
Yeah, it was very. To me, it was very pure in the
yeah,
sense of like this is a, there wasn't, at least there didn't seem to be a lot of, injection of.
yeah, like modern, and like, and that is some of the fear of like the longer we make these, the more modern we get. Like this, that like are we opening ourselves up to like Tolkien stories that are very like what Star Wars has become in some ways, of like a lot more modern, not classical, like maybe not as true to the spirit, like not as true to like the
Yeah.
Christian like underpinning.
Well, and then you just move into sort of this deconstruction, Zack Snyder realm of like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we deconstructed this like mythology or this hero, which is, I think, has its place, but I do feel like a lot of the tendency now is to like, well, let's just, you know, you think Lord of the Rings and Sauron, but like let's deconstruct this character, and it just kind of becomes, I don't know, less interesting and just not
Like
as
you almost wonder if these movies came out today, like the original Lord of the Rings, like they're good. I think they would do well, but like if they wouldn't be as beloved, or if people would be like, it's too black and white, and Frodo's too pure, and Aragorn's
yeah.
too pure. Like,
But I don't know. I think trying to do the blurring of the lines thing is maybe kind of getting old, because I feel like it's been done quite a bit now, and it's like it just kind of feels like more of a trope now with a lot of movies. They're like, he's a superhero, but he's got a dark side, and like,
yeah, like Batman works as Batman when he's like,
yeah,
he's sort of this dark torture guy, but like when all superheroes are that,
yeah,
and all of a sudden you're not.
or the anti-heroes.
Yeah, like everyone's anti-heroes, and like, you need sort of the pure classic stuff for the other stuff to work.
Yeah,
So hopefully this can do that. And this is a good time mention too. Like we are also getting, if you weren't familiar or aware, like Chronicles of Narnia movies. Like Netflix is making.
yeah,
Greta Gerwig, who did Barbie, which I did not like, but I do think she'll do a lot of her quotes she said leading up to these. I feel like she does, at least the way she speaks to me, gets sort of like
yeah.
she's made
She
it.
did do a modern adaptation of Little Women, which from everything I heard, was good. So
She did change some stuff to make it a modern adaptation.
yeah,
But I actually really liked that movie. But I do think she's made a note like of the theological stuff of Tolkien or of Lewis, and
yeah,
we do trust. But today it is two great Christian authors still going strong.
yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, I think if nothing else, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of all this.
But speaking of like deconstructing and crushing, and sort of how modern things can just destroy all the things we hold near and dear to our heart,
Down with modernity.
kind of the next story is an interesting one, because there's a lot of different things we could talk about for this, but it is an Apple advertisement that has sent some ripples across social media, advertising their new like paper thin iPad. So we'll drop the link to the ad if you haven't seen it in the show notes. But essentially, you have like sort of this platform of like all these things we love about culture, and there's like musical instruments and like
Yeah, imagine a giant hydraulic press. If
yeah,
you will.
and then they all get squashed and destroyed, and there's like paint flying and things breaking and guitars snapping, and then
pianos being
pianos, and it lifts
crumpled.
up, and like, hey, you don't even need that stuff, because what's left behind is an iPad. You have the song Sonny and Cher song, "All I Ever Needed Was You," playing in the background, and Tim Cook, the CEO, in his when he like tweeted out to this advertisement, he was very excited. Says, just imagine all the things it'll be used to create Unfortunately, that's not the message
What
that people
what
took away from
what they
this.
didn't imagine is how people would react to this video.
Yeah, so this thing, like, there's been, and again, like, there's controversies and stuff. Like, again, I don't think this is necessarily like a earth-shaking kind of controversy, but like, there's somewhere it's like, 3 people on Reddit were mad about this. Like,
Yeah.
this was more than that. Like, there's like a lot of like notable celebrities and people. Like, it sort of became this conversation, like of like it struck a nerve about like apparently people watching visuals of like culture and art and stuff being like smashed into pieces to make a new electronic device didn't necessarily excite people in the
Yeah.
way that. So, what are your takeaway? Are you
Yeah.
for destroying culture for iPads or?
Well, no, certainly not. But on the one hand, it was, you know, full credit to those who like executed this ad because it is a visually stunning ad, and so like it was very well done. That being said, it the meaning of it I think was a big swing and a miss, which was their I think their intent and their execution were sort of on different opposite directions, and so well executed, but I think they just missed the mark as to what this communicates. It's not communicating what they thought it was, and that is rather than like, hey, you can create all this amazing stuff with our simple, small, super thin, thinner than ever iPad. It was like you don't need any of those traditional instruments and tools. You just need our new modern technology. And yeah, I think it was a huge flop as far as like
Because like,
trying to communicate. Like you can see what they're trying to say, but it definitely said the
yeah,
opposite.
because even like some of their PR people that are quickly trying to put out fires after this ad, they released like a public like a formal apology where they said creativity is in our DNA at Apple, and it's incredibly important to you for us to design products that empower creatives all over the world. Our goal is to always celebrate the myriad of ways users express themselves and bring their ideas to life through the iPad. We missed the mark with this video, and we're sorry. So obviously, they're not the intent was not like, hey, let's destroy culture so you can buy a
Sure.
product, which is to I forget where I saw this on social media, but like, someone had like people have done edits of this and like just reversed the feed where instead of crushing all the culture down, you start with the iPad and like it opens up and like you have all these things kind of coming together and like all this art like almost like bursting out of the iPad and like
Yeah.
it's interesting how like it's the same visuals, but communicates completely different. Like this
Yeah.
sort of the reversed ad like becomes this empowering like you have this device and it can like put you in tune with all these things that we love and music and creativity and it's like giving birth to it rather than just smashing it
You
into
know,
pieces.
yeah, and I just feel like this is going to be an ad that like every future like marketing
It's going to be on
class
this
in
little poster.
college, yeah, this is going to be a case study, I think, for just like decades to come. Just because it is so fascinating on so many levels. Like, for instance, all the people that greenlit this, who knows how many people at Apple saw the final product and said, "Looks great, send it."
So the
Um,
question is, are those people still at Apple?
yeah, that is a good point. We'll have to do some follow up to that. But it's like you can also just see this as like, I mean, look, you can see we're both using Apple computers. I have an iPhone. Like, it's no question that Apple is used the world round by creatives, by all kinds of people, and because of, you could say, because of the machines they use, some of the greatest hit songs or whatever have been created on a Mac or with Apple devices, so on and so forth. um, but it is just interesting that like such a like huge company can have such an enormous miss when it comes to communicating what it is that they want to try and communicate.
Yeah, and I feel like some of the like you're saying, we're using. I'm an Apple guy, and like even like people that will rail against like we don't technology is so terrible and we are taking over our our cultural stuff that we love. Like so many of those people, like myself included, like would like cling white knuckled to a lot of these technological things. Like
Yeah.
technology is a good thing. Like it helps, and like we rely on technology.
Yeah.
I feel like why this ad is interesting to me is because I feel like it sort of hits the nerve right between there of this cultural like anxiety we have of like on the one hand we like technology is good, so much comes from technology, and then like on the other hand there is this unease about sort of how fast technology, like with the AI conversation and all
Yeah.
these things that like, are we losing like, our grasp on like the tangible, the more like materialness of like our world, and like, as things become all digital and like you don't even need to touch a piano or just touch our iPad screen, like, like what are we losing as like a culture when we, and like I feel like this ad just sort of like ignited a lot of those fears
Yeah.
that have already been around, but like, it's like, what does the future look like?
Yeah, and and I think people who are really, bullish on technology would say that, like you can just like you don't need a piano, you can just do it all digitally. Like you don't need to have all of these tactile things. Like you can just do it all in your computer, and that's fine. Some people like that, but I know for me, like I like the tactile things, and I think there is something that is like incredibly human about building things, making things with other things, and not just with like lines of code and zeros and ones in a screen. Like there is a difference in like what's made in software and in technology versus what's made in the actual physical world. And I think partly because we as humans are physical people, and I think we've been riding this sort of wave of technology for the past few decades, and I think it's leaving a lot of people unsatisfied because there is something that will, I think, never really satisfy, even as like uh you know like augmented reality and virtual reality gets better and better and better. I still think there is going to be something that's not satisfying about it because it is still this virtual thing and not like a physical thing in the room with you.
Which I feel like you even see, like even with, I mean, not exclusively younger generations, but like just like the role of like nostalgia right now, or like, even like a lot of like the so-called like digital natives, like Gen Z or younger millennials, like, even just to like collect Funko Pops or something like, about their shows that they like,
Yeah.
or like I know there's like to, collect VHSs and stuff, and like
Yeah.
things that like no one wants to watch a VHS anymore. Like, one of the best days, for culture ever was when we graduated from VHSs.
Yeah.
Those things are horrible. You have to like rewind them before you return them to the video rental store. Like,
Yeah.
no one wants to go back to that, but like people do because like there is this something about like physically holding things and like putting them in and like having that connection, as opposed to where everything is sort of this digital world we live
Yeah.
in. And I think even just as Christians too, because like, you know, maybe not directly, but I feel like our faith is very much like if you think of like the incarnation, like Jesus coming to earth,
Yeah.
dying, like the pinnacle of the faith, like that very much is like this sort of spiritual becoming, like there all throughout Christian, or like the communion, the Last Supper, like some of these things about like drinking the blood, like or the bread, and like Jesus was very intentional about like providing these physical, or
Yeah.
baptism as a symbol of new birth, and like that there is an importance like grounded, worked into our faith about being like kind of incarnational, like attached to things and like this physical reality, not just removed. That I feel like everyone should be aware of like sort of this digital stuff, but like Christians also have like investment in this. I think we even saw this too, like with the like after the pandemic, like when everything went virtual, and it's like, well, this is great. We can do virtual church. We don't even need to. And I feel like as time has gone on, some of these same sort of fears and anxieties like come up of like
Yeah.
we can, but like, do we want to? Is it the same? Like, what are we missing when we sort of crunch this all into, an iPad, like into some virtual
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And there is something just very physical about, um, really about even the faith that Jesus taught when he was on earth, like with the disciples, with the people he preached to. Like it was always grounded in the physical. And I think there's also just uh, this tendency, I think, sometimes even among Christians to almost be totally like cerebral in their faith as well. It's like all just sort of thinking these elaborate thoughts or these great thoughts, but never really coming down to the tangible, like, feeding the hungry, like reaching out, being present with people, doing works of service. Um, and so I think when you disconnect from the physical, there's always going to just be this, I think, a void, I guess, in both in your faith and I think in your just in your human experience,
Yeah, because
for lack of a better
there has
word.
been like a tradition of Christian segments, communities of like very much downplaying like the physical body, and it's
Yeah,
we're just this soul, and we just have this body, and like to some extent that's true, but but we also have this body, and God designed these bodies, and like He put us on Earth. He didn't just like leave us as some souls in heaven. Like
right,
there,
right.
that it is a very important part of being human is to like be physical, and so it is interesting. Like obviously, this I don't think this conversation is going to be ending or like dying down. Like
Yeah,
these anxiety, this ad more just sort of like poked and like reminded us like people are on edge about this stuff. Like people are concerned about AI and there's all the way that technology is replacing the things that we love and we're losing physical media. Like there's a big push for that. I collect DVDs because you don't want to
yeah.
trust Netflix and stuff.
Well,
But
I mean, like album sales, like vinyl records, I think are higher than they've ever been in the history of vinyl. And so you've got, on the one hand, you have Spotify that has the collection of all the music you could ever want that's ever been created, but also, artists are putting out vinyl records and like having record sales. Um, and also I think just the creation of like handcrafted goods, I think, is also on the rise. Like, you know, well made, made in the USA a lot of times, kind of goods that people are starting to gravitate towards rather than sort of the mass produced or just the more ethereal kind of stuff. So I think it definitely struck a nerve with.
yeah, and I do think culture's a pendulum. Like even like Barnes and Noble has like rebound. Like I feel like there's always going to be that back and forth of like
Yeah,
the further we get away, the more we want to get back to it, and then we get enticed by the. But it is interesting. Kind of one last kind of cultural thing that I wanted to get into because this has been on our show notes for several weeks, and we keep not getting to it.
you just
Uh,
want to get it off the show notes
yeah, I
so
just want to
you
get off my
finally delete it
yeah,
and move on.
it just keeps nagging at me, and that's just Hollywood and video games, particularly adaptations, movies of video games. And this is sort of one that I think you actually maybe sent me this article.
Yeah, I saw it in The Economist.
Yeah, The Economist, an article they published, how Hollywood fell in love with video games. I think it was particularly inspired by the Fallout show on Amazon, which is um, adapting sort of a classic video game series, and kind of like in the article, like, it's not like a deep dive thing, but just sort of the perspective of this author is just like comic book movies now seem like they've sort of run their course. Like we still get a bunch of them, they're still going to be good ones, but they're not like the big draw, like where everything
Yeah.
is you get like 15 of these every year and like shows. And it seems like people have kind of got tired of or are getting tired of video game or comic book movies, and kind of like what's next, like where's Hollywood gonna look to mine more box office hits. And the article sort of makes the case that like video games are that new frontier, and he's notes there's like as of right now there's at least like 70 new like video game movies like in active development. And I kind of like one I'm excited for, the Legend of Zelda, a video game movie that will be coming out. I don't know when that's going to come out, a year or two from now. But it's just sort of interesting because I feel like video games are like they're, if you crunch the numbers, they're one of the most influential like kind of arts, entertainment, like mediums in the world. Like they're like,
Yeah.
they bring in about the most money, like even more than like Hollywood often brings in, and like
Yeah.
they have like more active players, and like there's so much to them. But I feel like they're sort of like the forgotten, like when, especially as like Christians and stuff, like we think of like, engage the culture. You gotta look at the worldviews in movies and what's on TV, or, what Taylor Swift lyrics. But like we almost never talk about video games.
Yeah.
But what some thoughts on that? Like what does it, is
Yeah.
it see that?
No, I mean, I think there certainly is. Like, one, it's just Hollywood will always look to the thing that can make it more money. And I think right now that's probably video games. And it's anytime you can find like a bankable franchise or a beloved franchise that can have like a very long afterlife as a movie or TV show, I think Hollywood, again, Hollywood as a whole will be interested in, just because that's sort of ready-made material that I think they can have a lot of fun with, and sometimes they do it well. Oftentimes, it's probably not that great. I don't know if too many. Like I know there was like the Halo show, I think, that was on
It's still
Paramount,
going.
which is still going. I hadn't seen any
I
of
haven't
it.
seen it.
That was sort of where maybe my video game career like
It
probably
peaked.
peaked. Was like back in the original Halo days. I haven't really played much since then. Um, but yeah, it is one of those areas that I think it's much harder to like approach and talk about because it is so like multi-pronged. There's not like a video game. I think, maybe like Fortnite and what is it, Roblox are maybe like two that a lot of people maybe have something
And like Minecraft, like my
or
kids, like
Minecraft,
that was a
yeah.
game that like people my age played when I was a kid, and like my kids love that game. Like they're
Yeah.
making a Minecraft movie, I think next year. Like
Of course they are.
like Jack Black is in it. Like it's
Of course
and
it
like
is.
like I'll eat this microphone if like there's not a Fortnite movie in the next
Oh, sure.
3 years. Like
Yeah.
um
So I think all of that yeah, I just think it's just trickier to talk about because it's a video game can be such a kind of long and involved and multifaceted thing that it's not like, oh, did you see this video game? Like I
well,
think
I think
it has this like much longer shelf life because you can play it in different modes. You can, you can play through, I guess, like the whatever they call it, like the single player storyline campaign. Yeah, that's the word. Sorry, it's been so long since I've like
won't
done.
make you a gamer yet.
Well, I'd love to be if I had the time. But yeah, so there's like the campaigns and you've got multiplayer games and all this kind of stuff. And so I just think it's
Because I feel like the other tricky part is like that it's changed. Like video games are, they're the new kid on the block still. Like
yeah,
we've had video games for a while, but like we've had movies for over 100 years, and like my grandparents would go to the
yeah,
we had silent movies. You can trace it back where like video games are still pretty new. Like
yeah,
like my parents didn't grow up playing video games.
yeah.
Like
I mean, it's
we
sort of
played
like our
Pong.
lifetime is
Um,
the lifetime
yeah, like,
of
so I
video
feel like a
games.
lot of the people that I at least to this point have been the ones like in the Christian community speaking about culture and some of that kind of stuff just didn't grow up with this medium like
Yeah,
and the stuff they did have like Pong or some of these games like they weren't what they are now. Like they weren't they were just sort of this trivial like diverting silly you just
yeah,
push this button and like where like now like you get these game like I feel like a lot of people don't realize if they're not like gamers don't realize this how like immersive and like how like these like super in-depth like rich storytelling and like
yeah,
like there's tons of these like sweeping stories and things like video games are a lot more than like Candy Crush. Like
right.
they really are another, which I think this kind of Hollywood trend is showing us like these are these like very gripping stories and stuff that we can move into movies, but like in some ways they're almost like more immersive or like influential because we spend more time with them and we
Right.
interact with them. And like I feel like as Christians we should be aware of video games and stories probably more than we are.
Yeah, because most people are spending way more time on a given video game than the last 10 movies that they saw combined. I mean, like people can sink hours a day into a single video game, whereas they might see a new release once, and it's sort of the same thing that we talked about the other day about the influence of music, because like you can just listen to music all day long, and it's going to have a much greater impact on you than just a single viewing of whatever movie or TV show has come out. And so just the time with the thing, whether we've kind of had a discussion about it being art or not, but like time spent in game, I think is just way higher than time spent watching movies. Or now again, if you don't play video games like myself, then that's kind of beside the point. But for those who do, like you're spending way more time in video games than you are probably
And you
watching
just have less
movies.
like as like telling a story through a video game like you just have more time. Like you're not
Yeah.
restricted to a 2 hour, which I feel as though a lot of like the initial video game adaptations like were all terrible. It's because they couldn't figure out like there's things video games can do, like the interactive part, like the
Yeah.
longer form storytelling that they couldn't figure out how to like condense that into a passive 2 hour experience.
Yeah,
Like,
well, and it also like the amount of budgets going into like the production of these video games too. I mean, there's like huge name actors that are like voice acting characters in some of these video games. Like these are like if you're not familiar with it, like these are like massive, massive productions to do these video games. Tons of money are going into it, and so it's not just this little, side show that I think maybe like our parents' generation may think it is, or if you're not familiar with it, you may just think like, okay, well, it's a video game. Like, what's the big deal? And the big deal is people spend a ton of money on it, and they cost a lot of money to produce, and people spend a lot of their time in those video games.
yeah, well, I feel like, I have two 9-year-old kids. Like, I feel like by the time they're, in college or whatever, like their generation, like, I wouldn't be surprised if sort of the general like consensus was just like video games, like that they spoke of video games the way that we've traditionally spoken of movies. Like, whereas
Yeah.
at the very least, like they're equal, like where video games are just as, as important, like, and kind of shaping culture and the stories and the things that we kind of glean from these games, which is why I think as Christians we should be, we shouldn't wait until then to be like, oh, maybe video games matter. Like we should
Yeah.
be sort of invested in like and just engaging with some of these stories. But speaking of stories, not necessarily video games, but just movies, we do have the next segment of this podcast episode out now and coming soon.
So there's been the latest installment of the Ape movies, another one which I have not seen. Daniel, you saw it.
I did
the
see-
Kingdom of the
I
Planet
said last
of
week, like apes are just cool.
the apes.
Like I love apes. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about me, but I go to the zoo. I could stand there all day, and they're just cool.
Yeah.
And this movie is awesome. Like this movie is so good. There's so much about. Like I think all these new Planet of the Apes movies have been good, and I know like this one maybe some people criticize it wasn't like as dark or gritty or like technically as good, but like it's just a good story. Like it's very classic, kind of like we talked about the Tolkien stuff, like classic sweeping kind of hero's journey. Like this is stuff that we like about movies, but also with apes riding horses. So
Yeah,
two
and
thumbs up for me.
who doesn't love
Because,
apes on horses? There's no way to segue into what's coming up from apes on horses. Everything else will just be a giant letdown. But there are a few movies coming up. Back to Black, which is the Amy Winehouse biopic.
Which I don't know if I'm going to see. I don't know if I'll be able to work that out. And I was not were you an Amy Winehouse?
I've liked her music, and I did watch the documentary on her, which is quite tragic.
Yeah, I know her.
And she was just like a phenomenal singer and musician, but yeah, a very sad.
tortured poet.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know. I just want us to mention that though, because that is a bigger movie, I guess. I mean, I don't know how big, but it's coming out, and I just don't know if I'll be able to catch that.
But aside from that, if
the imaginary friends, did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
I did not, I don't know what that says about me.
Oh.
But
You had enough real friends.
well, I don't know that I would had a ton of real friends, but I had a lot of siblings.
Oh, okay,
and so that
who
sort
needs
of
friends when you have family? That will preach. But so this movie with Ryan Reynolds, I am hoping to check this one out this week. If I don't get it out this weekend, we'll have the review out early next week. I don't know. It's like a family movie. I like family movies. I have kids.
you have a family.
Yeah, I have a family. I'll probably bring my kids to. I think it could be good. Ryan Reynolds is funny, so yeah, I'm hopeful that it's not terrible.
And you've already seen Sight.
Yeah, so I have
New
seen. Speaking
Angel
of
Studios.
movies, so this movie actually comes out in 2 weeks, or by the time this episode drops, it'll be next week weekend. I've already seen it, and we'll have our review out maybe by the time this episode drops. But I like this movie a lot. I think it is sort of another kind of what you expect from Angel Studios. I don't think it pops as much as some other movies. Like it's a smaller scope, but it's just good.
Good.
Worth checking out. But speaking of things that are worth checking out,
Or are they?
well, we'll let you decide on that. The last segment of this podcast, we have things we like that you should like too. And once again, I am resisting the temptation to just dive deep into, European power metal and, symphonic metal from Italy. That maybe I'll save that for a couple weeks.
I'm proud of you.
Sort of to keep up with the theme, like we just talked about with the video games, I thought I would share a video game I like, and that is Stardew Valley. So this is a game that's been around for a while. A lot of you guys maybe have played it. I think it came out like 10 years ago, but it's still being, the creator's still like releasing, updates, and still a very like active game out there, and a lot of people playing it. But it's just charming. Me and my wife have been playing this. It's essentially like a farming simulator. Like you're like some person like that is dying inside, stuck in the corporate world, and you sell you sell everything, you move out to this farm, and they land you there, and then you just like grow crops, and you build buildings and raise cows, and like there's like a village, like there's sort of like a storyline, like you progress, and but it's just a very like relaxing, like it's fun, but it's not it's not like intense, and like the music is relaxing, and like so this me and my wife, we've sort of dipped our toes into this game really for the last like year or two, every now and then, and just enjoying like being getting away from the craziness of life, even in virtual form, to enjoy some farming. But have you ever heard of this game? This is, I know it's like a super popular game. I know you're not.
No, I've never heard of it, but
It's
you
like-
had me at Farm
I know.
Simulator.
How do you at farms? It's like also like very like pixel art. Like it's sort of in like a retro style, and it's just cool too because like the whole game was made by one person. Like it wasn't a team. It was like an indie
Yeah.
game. That like he made the music, he made the art style, he like coded it all, and like I think he's like over the years he's brought in some help, but like still essentially just him. And it's just
Which I think is so cool about, like, I'm assuming this is like a mobile, like you
yeah, you
play
can do
on
it on
your
mobile. You can also do
phone.
it on like computer. You can PC. You can do it on like I play it on like the Nintendo Switch. Like
Okay.
so you can play. You can be like multiplayer, but yeah, because this one guy, and like, he still has like a very close like he's always tweeting. Like he'll tweet directly and like talk to people and like help them with problems, and like it's just sort of this neat like it's like a video game, but that is big, but it's like not lost. In,
It's
big
like approach.
corporate.
Yeah.
So if you're a gamer,
That's
and,
cool.
You want something a little slower pace but still fun and kind of retro, could you guys check out Stardew Valley? Any kind of final thoughts for us this week?
Well, a big happy birthday to David Attenborough. Turns 98. The man, the myth, the legend. So
I know it's going to be a sad day. I mean, I thought we'd already had that sad day. I didn't realize that he.
I feel like this happened a few years back. I have a vague memory of us talking about David Attenborough,
every
and,
time it's
and,
brought
and
up,
every
I just
time
assume that he.
it's like, didn't he die? I think his brother Richard had passed, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Well,
But
I
I could be wrong. I don't know.
this repeatedly. I get to enjoy
The fact that he's
knowledge
still
that
alive.
still alive. We still get that that sweet voice narrating nature's great adventures. But speaking of adventures, we hope you will join us next week. Every Thursday, we're dropping new episodes of this podcast. We'd love to have you, be a part of it. Again, send us in messages, questions, topics you'd like us to cover. Would always love to just hear from you guys. But we hope we will see you then for more conversations on faith and pop culture.